Look for the truth and swallow your pride for things that you thought that didn't exist that you might find.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear viewers, to another one of our fantastic episodes of the Pool of Ideas, and I'm your host for the program, Junald Dar. Dear viewers, as the name suggests, the Pool of Ideas is a series talking about a range of different ideologies that have been running across the world that affect our daily lives. It's important for us to understand these ideologies so we can truly understand how the world is the way it is and how people formulate ideas and how we as Muslims can understand these ideologies and use them to our advantages. Not just that, but on the Pool of Ideas we also look at these ideologies from the microscope of Islam and see how we can actually use them and what has our reaction been. Have we been positive or receptive or not? And our guest to answer these questions, if I can welcome him, and then we get straight into our questions. We have with us Dr. Mahmoud Al-Khalifa. I'd like to welcome you to our program. Mashallah, you've been working very hard on this series, talking about lots of different ideologies. So I'd like to give you a warm welcome and say Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Doctor, in our previous episode we discussed democracy, but today I would like to look at democracy and Islam together. Could I ask you to just initially talk about democracy as a definition? What is it as a system?
Democracy is basically a system that allows people to choose their rulers and people in powerful positions like parliament, prime ministers and presidents.
Okay.
So basically it's a system that allows for, and it's a system that allows for the peaceful exchange of positions.
Okay, excellent. And also, Doctor, what's the importance of talking about not just democracy, but talking about Islam with democracy?
Usually people or Orientalists view Islam suspiciously, and they usually say Islam and democracy are incompatible, which is not really a reflection of reality.
Okay.
If we, for example, look at modern Islamist movements, you'll find that many of them were voted into power in Turkey, in Egypt, in Tunisia, and other states.
Okay.
And that they are doing very well in advancing the needs of society.
Okay.
And they're willing to get out of office if they were voted out, and this has happened in Turkey several times. So basically the contention that democracy for Islamist political parties is a one-way ticket to power, after which those parties, Islamist parties, are going to impose a strict system or a dictatorship isn't a valid contention, given the real examples we're having in Turkey and other countries. On the contrary, most of the Islamist parties who were voted into power by majorities, Muslim majorities in many Arab countries, were stifled or voted out of power, or were never handed power with the support of through military coups.
Okay.
Not through any, let us say, any popular will.
Okay,
but you can simply say that the popular will in most Muslim countries, Muslim and Arab countries, were stifled through military coups supported by Western countries who have a lot of stake in keeping secular military governments which reflect the interests of certain Western countries.
Also, Doctor, there's a slight contradiction here, because we find that Western governments are so adamant in trying to bring democracy to the Muslim world. They say one of the reasons to why they invaded Afghanistan was for democracy, and there were reasons for invading Iraq was also democracy. But yet you say that in other countries, in Muslim countries, where democratically certain groups have been elected, Western interests come full force and remove these particular groups. Why is there this double standard?
It's not a double standard. I think democracy, as declared as one, it's not just democracy that is used as a pretext to invade countries, but for example, the protection of women and freeing of women, Muslim women, from oppressive systems and so on. But in reality, most Western countries who talk about democracy, they want a democracy that would bring to office secularist regimes,
Okay.
or that would support Western interests in the Middle East, for example.
Right.
But when that same system doesn't work the way Westerners or Western governments wanted, they do not support it. On the contrary, they would support a military coup in order to bring back the old regime, in order that used to protect Western interests. So it would be childish to think that America or Britain or France would support a democracy in the Islamic world in order for that democracy to, which would necessarily stand in the monopolies these countries have on, let us say, the economies
Okay, so
of those Muslim countries.
sure. After that statement, Doctor, is it fair then to say then those in the Muslim world who are working on the pretext of establishing democracy in their countries, that they're working in a very selfish or very narrow-minded way?
It is not narrow-minded way. The world is not run by, it's not a utopia, and Western countries are working for their own interests. Okay, so they would not really work for the interests of people in the Middle East.
Okay.
A Middle East that's in the grip of military regimes, pro-Western military regimes, is easier to control than a Middle East run by democratically elected governments that would defend the national rights of countries, that would take an independent attitude towards world politics.
Okay. And also, Doctor, in certain countries, like you made mention of, certain groups have won democratically, like if we look in Palestine or Gaza, certain countries have, groups have won the majority vote the right to rule. But yet America and other people will say no, they'll put these people on a blacklist and say they are not able to rule. So how do you reconcile between these two opposites?
As I just said, it's not an opposite. The idea is the West doesn't care about democracy. It is used only as a pretext. It worries about its own interests.
Okay.
So basically, if a country, for example, we have many examples where certain reformist Islamist movements were involved in politics, and they won their won a majority.
Okay.
Like La Fronde Islamique du Salut in Algeria
Okay.
in 1990, and they were poised to win power. And in that time, France and Europe, there were interventions that supported a military coup or a military shutdown of the whole political process in order to prevent an Islamist movement from popular Islamist movement from getting into power through a popular vote. So.
Okay, so free and fair elections and free democracy according to the will of Western interests. Okay, Doctor, let's look at you made mention of Algeria. Let's go back in history a little bit and have a look at the relationship that Muslim or the Arab world has had with democracy over the last 50 to 100 years. How have they been receptive to democracy?
Actually, the idea of democracy, there was a liberal period in the history of Egypt, for example, in 1923, and there were a multi-party democracy in Egypt. This is called the liberal period of Egyptian history, and it worked well. But later, that came to an end with the continued pull and push between the occupying British and the Egyptian monarchy.
Okay. Also, if we can have a look now, we jump a little bit forward and have a look over the last couple of years where we've seen the Arab Spring, for example. Is the Arab Spring a fruit, should I say, or an offshoot of democracy in the Arab world?
No, no, it's the other way. It's the other way around. For example, had there been democracy in the Arab Middle East, there wouldn't have been any revolutions.
Okay.
Because revolutions come as a reaction to tyranny, to dictatorial regimes. Revolutions come to displace a political system and a regime that is stifling a country's development, that is not allowing anybody to vote his own, to voice his own concerns.
Okay.
So there is revolution as a violent act, is a political act that wants to change regime through violence.
Okay.
And that's why democracy is a good idea, because democracy allows people to vote people in and out of office without the resort to violence or to revolutions.
Okay. The Arab Spring actually began from Tunisia, where a gentleman didn't get his rights and he burnt himself alive. Can I just ask you to talk about the origins of the spring and why did that man do that and how did it get to where it got to?
That man's act was an act of desperation.
Okay.
That he lost his human rights. He was dehumanized when he was trying to earn his daily living, which under dictatorial regimes, it is very hard for people to have a good living without being dehumanized. So he was not protected by the law. He was put under dehumanizing conditions, and that led to his symbolic act of desperation, which inspired others to change the regime, to to hope for a society where people's dignity is respected and not trampled by a dictatorial regime that is growing rich while the other people are growing poor.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor, on answering those questions. Let's take a short break here, and then when we come back, we'll continue our discussion between Islam and democracy. So, dear viewers, let's take a short break here, and then when we come back, we'll have a look at some of the details of Islam and democracy. Does Islam equate democracy, or is there a difference? And if there is a difference, what is it? And also some of the contentions. Why are some people very distant towards democracy and don't accept it as a part of the Islamic way of life? Let's take a short break here, and then when we come back, we will continue.
Open your eyes to the world of today.
Now that we know more about da'wah, what would you say are the characteristics of a da'i?
Sincerity.
Sincerity. Yes?
Good relation with Allah.
Good relation with Allah. Okay.
Patience.
Yes, sir?
Good manners.
Good manners. And there is much more to that. Join us in our program, the Da'wah Workshop, by your brother, Dr. Rayyan Fawzi Arab, so that we could talk more about Da'wah exclusively on Huda TV.
Open your eyes to the world of today.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers, joining us on our fantastic new program, The Pool of Ideas. And our discussion for today is about Islam and democracy. So, Doctor, let's continue with our discussion. And I would like to ask a follow-up question of what we were talking about before. Does Islam equate democracy, or are there some real important differences between the two?
Islam and democracy, they're not in opposition, as we said before.
Sure.
Because Islam is a meritocratic system that would approve of democracy, that would put people's choices into consideration. The Prophet ﷺ said, إذا وسد الأمر إلى غير أهله فانتظر الساعة. When a certain position was given to a person who is not really up to it, then this is one sign of the coming of doomsday. And this is a strong condemnation of the tyrannical systems that would put people who are not good enough for a position, they would put them in positions of power just because they are close relatives or because of interest. So a democratic system that would allow a situation where people vote into power, people who deserve to be in that position, is very much a reflection of the higher principles of Islam. So Islam is never against democracy. Although, for example, we have the democratic system allows for the opinion of the majority to be considered all the time. But in certain circumstances where the majority decides on a certain thing that goes against the principles of Sharia or the principles of good morality, in that case Islam wouldn't care about the decision of the majority. For example, if the majority decided that same-sex marriage is a good idea, Islam would not do that because it goes against the main principles and the main morality of society. So that is where democracy and Islam part ways in terms of morality, because Islam has certain standard concepts and principles that should not be put to vote.
So there are certain aspects inside of Islam which are uncompromisable, and there are other aspects, just like democracy, where we can vote or make laws according to the times and situations.
Yeah, and even in the Western societies, there are certain principles that are beyond the popular vote, like, for example, human rights, like private ownership. All these things are kind of sacred and are not really put to vote.
And also, Doctor, what would be your response to those who say that democracy equals a shura in Islam, which is consultation? Are the two the same, or is there a difference between them?
Every tradition has its own history, and they're not the same, because some people agreed as to whether shura is an obligatory thing for the ruler, or is it just something he does out of his own accord. But there is a strong opinion from jurists of Islam that shura is obligatory for a ruler. A ruler in Islam has to consult his people, has to consult people of professionals as regards certain the decisions he's going to take.
And also, Doctor, if I can just very briefly ask you to just elaborate on the principles after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We had 4 rightly guided leaders, and the process in which those were put forward, would you say that they were democratic processes, or were they different?
They were different because in Islam there was this idea of precedence. People who preceded in embracing Islam, the first fighters of Islam, people with the highest morality and the highest price paid for the survival of the Muslim community, they were given precedence because they were the ones who understood Islam the best from the Prophet. And that's why the early 4 caliphs were the closest to the Prophet. They were the most, they were the ones who understood Islam in its perfect example. And that's why there's a concept of precedence. But after the death of those kind of people, the precedence was no longer used as a way of choosing a ruler.
And also, Doctor, why is it then many a times you find certain Muslim thinkers or even some of the jurists actually saying that democracy is not permissible in Islam? What are the reasons to that, and why is there some maybe rigidity in that?
This rigidity is a reflection of the other side of Orientalism, where people come up and say, well, Islam is incompatible with democracy. Islam is incompatible with modernity. They want to put Islam in a box and shut it away from life.
Okay.
And maybe those jurists, they don't accept the West, so they don't want to take any ideas from the West, because and this is a very narrow-minded attitude that probably serves certain governments or certain people who are who do not want democracy, which would normally put them out of office.
Okay, so it's politically motivated as well.
Yeah, so you have politically motivated fiqh, which we as Muslims, we should not really agree with it.
Okay, politically motivated jurists.
Yeah, people who are justifying, they're using Islam and fiqh in order to justify certain governments or rulers. And Islam is, a jurist should be a voice of truth to everybody, not a voice of political justification.
But then, Doctor, that puts the common Muslim like myself and others in a very difficult situation, because then we're hearing our rightly guided jurists saying something which is not in conformity to what Islam is teaching.
There's no rightly guided jurists. Jurisprudence is a matter of going to Sharia, looking at the interests of the Muslim community, and doing ijtihad. And it's not, it doesn't give a special status to the scholar.
Okay.
It's just voicing his ijtihad according to Sunnah and Sharia and the Quran and Sunnah, and we shouldn't take anybody's ijtihad as obligatory or compulsory to accept.
Okay, slightly off topic, but still on the same line, Doctor. Is it then okay for a Muslim to challenge opinions of the jurists with regards to politics and democracy and so on and so forth?
I think a normal Muslim is not in a position to challenge or not challenge, but there will be always certain scholars who do not go along the lines set by political leaders, and they're well known, and they don't agree, and they will give a good argument for that, which ordinary Muslims can use to respond to the fuqaha of politics.
Okay, it's very difficult as the common man would usually put their trust in the jurists, but if there is some biasness inside the jurist, then it becomes difficult to...
No, as a Muslim is not, we don't have a priesthood which imposes certain divinely given ideas. A Muslim has his own mind, his own knowledge of Islam, and he can decide.
Okay, excellent. Also then, Doctor, I would like to know, what's the role, many Muslims have this contention with democracy, what's the role of God inside of a democratic system?
God is the source of all value which democracy should respect. For example, when God says that homosexuality is a heinous act, then democracy cannot change that.
Okay.
So God is present in Sharia. God is present in many, in being the author of the main, the moral guide in society, which democracy should keep in mind.
Okay, and also, Doctor, if we look at the Western interests once again, why are the West so adamant in trying to spread democracy across the Middle East?
The West isn't adamant about anything other than its interests, and it's willing to invade countries, trample democracy, support co-leaders everywhere in order to support their interests.
Okay.
I would say that the West is adamantly interested in subverting real democracy, and the West would accept a decorative democracy, something where you have a secular regime that works for the West, for the Western interests, but it has all the appearance of democracy without its real core meaning.
Sure.
You will have parliaments, you will have elections, and 99% votes for one person. So you will have only the appearance of democracy, which would please the West, or appease its moral compunctions,
So, Doctor,
but it doesn't reflect any real
sure.
democracy.
So, Doctor, as Muslims in Muslim lands and the systems like you just described, what can this person do? How can he better himself and aim to better his country and his people if, as you're saying, the democracy that is in his country is biased, is not free or fair? What can we do and how can Muslims take advantage of the system?
I think we should be involved in politics as much as we can and try to support parties and ideas that work for the establishment of Sharia law. Yeah. So that's the best step to take.
Okay, so being as Muslims, we should be involved, fully involved.
Yeah, we should be fully involved in politics. We should support ideas and parties that work for the establishment of Islamic Sharia. We shouldn't vote for secular parties that trample Sharia and are basically looking for the establishment, imitating secular models that would put Sharia out of the whole moral landscape
Doctor,
of Muslims.
What if somebody came to you with the argument that people have tried to implement Sharia through democratic means, and every time in different countries around the world they've been crushed severely? So what if now we use the secular model and we aim with the open slogan that we're aiming and want a secular system? In due course, when we have more strength, we can aim for a Islamic system. What would you say to that?
I would say that we continue to use democracy because it's a good idea, because otherwise your only other choice is to use violence, and that would cause a lot of damage, and it's against Sharia to use violence to get to power, because it would upset society and cause more damage than good.
Okay. Doctor, on that note, we are going to conclude, and I'd like to thank you very much for your detailed answers. I know this time around I was throwing questions at you and you're responding back, so I'd like to thank you for your patience, and also like to thank you for your time and knowledge as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and conclude by saying Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Okay. Dear viewers, we've come to the end of this particular episode of the Pool of Ideas, where we had a look and a comparison of Islam and democracy. And I must say so myself, I was very much impressed, and I learned lots of new things as well. We can see the reality on the ground. Democracy is one thing when you open the books, but when you look in the Muslim world, it's completely different. But we must be educated, we must understand, and just like the doctor said, we must make use of all the tools of democracy that are there so we can better ourselves. And in due course, Allah knows best, in due course we will be in a better position, stronger position, and we can take things forward from there. So I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in, and inshallah ta'ala we will see you on an upcoming episode on the Pool of Ideas. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Open your eyes to the world of today. Believe not the lies that they always say. Look for the truth and swallow your pride.